I would like to ask you, particularly, well, as both as an intellectual and as a humanities scholar, and well, actually, some of us also, we support the idea of a well-rounded education, and that includes obviously humanities. How, I mean, is there anything, or how can we counter that sort of narrative or should we? Or well, I mean, we should, yes, but
yes.
I mean, is it? I like sometimes I think that it's a bit of a very uphill battle.
Yes. Let's see. The same way we just mentioned that in the past, a certain group of religious people made a self-criticism about their selfishness or of living separated from society in order to achieve heaven or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps we have to do the same as academics and try to establish, that's what I try, particularly myself, I try to make connection from the academy, the university, and the rest of the world. And one way is using the mass media, for example, as much as you can. And writing in, for example, in papers, in academic paper are very dry. You have to be sometimes a specialist to understand a single page. And that is okay because we need to push the limits of knowledge, that is okay. But we have to be able also to connect with the rest of the society. You have to accumulate things to be successful, to be rich, and that is more or less the value of a consumerist society. Mm-hmm. And we are living in a deeply materialist consumerist society, so we cannot ignore that. And that is why, for example, we as universities became a kind of branch of that office that, and even many huge companies come to a university saying, we need people prepared for this, for that. And nobody questioned that because, of course, parents, students are very worried about their future jobs. That is completely understandable. We have to prepare people for the labor market, yes. But that is not everything. But at the same time, we have to challenge always. We have to challenge everything. Remember, Professor, we are troublemakers. So if you come and say the sky is blue, I'm going to question that, and probably we'll discover that it's not all the time blue. Most of the time, it's not blue. But anyway, that is our job, and we have to question the big paradigm of we have to produce. And one way to keep that anxiety in the population is the precarization of jobs. So everybody are worried about not just getting the job. When you get the job, you are always worried about losing that job. And because of that, you are a slave, wage slave, because you don't question anything. And so the level of anxiety, of precarization, instability in the society, which is very, very good for the market, very good for the economy, but not good for the people. And we have to question that. And the only way to do that job is to connect with the rest of the society. We're not gods, but I think we have to challenge everything, even ourselves. How? Well, saying, break the bubble. The university is a bubble, but it's not the only bubble. The society is composed by multiple bubbles. Our bubble is right now one of the most productive from an economic point of view. In the agriculture, in the industry, everything needs a lot of high technology that is normally developed and produced in university, etc. But that is not everything. We are not animals that need food to eat and period. We have spiritual, psychological need as well. We have to know the human capital that we inherited from literature, from philosophy, from art, from cinema, and the market also has played a very negative role in that, corrupting what has been real art or high art. How? Simplifying it. The same way that the market rules impose their law and simplifies the individuals, making a very, very narrow being with very few ideas and very few horizons, etc. The same has done, because it's very important to the second consequence, has done with art. So, for example, very simple. In the case of literature, the easiest novel is to read, the easier to sell it. Because if you do write a book thinking that you have to sell it, of course, you need to survive. If you are a writer, completely understandable. An editor needs to survive, completely understandable. But if that is the only goal, just to sell and to make money, you are going to simplify the product.
The thing that first comes to mind is that, well, I mean, mass media have, well, you know, they're basically a holding of specific interests.
Yes.
And well, you know, there are editorial lines, and there are you know, they're essentially trying to sell a product.
Yes,
so
exactly.
When you are trying to combat that, it's sort of like adding an extra layer of difficulty.
Absolutely, but that is the reality that we have to deal with, and it has been more or less the same for a long time. In the case of mass media, we were talking a little bit before about how the mass media was the arm of manipulation, mm-hmm. And one of those manipulation was the fake news that now everybody talk about fake news, but there was a lot of fake news at the beginning of the 20th century, throughout the 20th century, and that media was used in different ways to manipulate opinion. Very, very briefly, I do recommend to take note and read about Edward Bernays, for example. Okay, and very briefly, Edward Bernays was the double nephew of Sigmund Freud, and came to the U.S. very young age, and became the mastermind of the public opinion manipulation. And he also sells many wars, including wars in Central America. For example, the CIA destroyed the only democracy in Central America, in Guatemala, in 1953, because the democratic elected president, Jacobo Bernays, who was not a communist, had a bad idea to implement his promise of dominant, nationalization of a tiny piece of land. He proposed to compensate the United Fruit Company, paying the value of the land that the company declaring its tax returns. And they say no way. And they just convinced the CIA and many others to destabilize that government, because many in the United Fruit Company had shares in the.
So many people in government and in the CIA had shares in the United Fruit Company.
Company, exactly. There are many stories with the Dole brothers, etc. Long story short, Bernays was able to mislead the American population and also the Central American people, selling the idea that Bernays was communist. Mm-hmm. And
you mean Arbenz?
Arbenz.
Yes.
Sorry,
okay.
Not
yes.
Bernays.
Yes.
Jacobo Arbenz. Thank you.
Yes.
And finally, they succeed that way. They destroy that democracy. The U.S. just placed a puppet in the government, Castillo Armas. After the 50s through the 80s late, they had in Guatemala a terrible conflict, civil wars. Many 100,000 people die. And most of those governments, every government were dictatorships, military dictatorships, brutal dictatorships, and criminal dictatorships were supported by the U.S. governments. And Bernays was able to manipulate the opinion to sell that. And the same happened we can give dozens of examples in Latin America. But that was the role of the manipulation of public opinion through the mass media. So fake news is nothing new. It was even more tragic in the past. And so that is a reality we have to deal with, but we have no other way that try to expose what is the truth based on the documents we have. In those stories, there is no discussion because no scholar in the US discussed what I said previously, because documents are everywhere and there are declassified documents in George Washington University and many other archives. And so there is no discussion about that.
So it is in what you're talking about. It's not really a matter of opinion.
No.
It is fact. It's historical and social fact. Right?
Clearly backed by evidence, backed by documents, etc., etc. And that is our job.
Yes.
Because but we have to do that, but also communicate that to the people through what? Well, mostly through the media too. So the media is good to manipulate opinion, but may work sometimes as a tool to disassemble those narratives that are completely baseless, and we have to provide the proof.
It's sort of like the myth of Sisyphus, right? Like pushing the stone uphill and then going up there, and then the stone falls down, and you have to do it all over again. So it can be a little. I guess it can be not a little, very frustrating at times.
Yeah, it is. But we have no option.
Right.
I mean, not moral option. We have many options. I mean, it's much more comfortable to please the power. It's much more safer. Some people cry when they are compassionate with powerful people. They don't need that compassion, but it's much easier and comfortable. But sometimes if you have a certain commitment with truth, which is a moral obligation, particularly in the academia, because in the academia we have even more moral obligation to do that, because we have certain resources and certain power. We are not powerful, but we have certain power to do certain research. And so we have to share what we found.
The different trends in terms of the face of the population, if you want to put it that way. I mean, whether this America wants it or not, those trends are going to continue to happen. So essentially, it will sort of naturally, organically change the definition of.
Even if we ask what am I, it's very hard to answer that question. Even when we consider, well, I am an individual, but I have changed throughout my entire life, and many times. And but just consider a huge nation that you are. In that case, you have a much more complicated problem. If you look at the picture, today's picture, and it's also more complicated if you look throughout history. First of all, I would say it's a good exercise, but completely useless. And the question, what America is, or we'll say, what are the Americans better? And also, it's very hard to answer. First of all, because you will have different definition from different groups. And even if you have a picture in a moment, that's going to change. Just imagine Jefferson meeting a cowboy in Texas. He will say, I'm pretty sure, or not sure, but it's an imagine experiment. He will say that is just a white Mexican, because a cowboy that now we identify from abroad. And also, many Americans may identify the cowboy. Yeah,
the Marlboro Man, right?
Yes, exactly, like the real American.
Yes.
That is a mix of Mexican traditions of the Anglo, who, when they migrate to Texas and reinstall slavery there because it was illegal there, but they also adopted many Mexican traditions, like the vaquero, the cowboys, the vaquero, and the hat, the guns, the etc. The rest of the part of the tradition. That will be completely foreigners for the founding father generation that were more British-like people. So who is the real America? In that case, even white, in both cases, very white. It's very hard to define. The easiest definition.
Either were born here or decided to...
Or to migrate, or exactly,
become naturalized.
Exactly,
yes,
exactly. And then you will have a huge diversity of Americans. Because what America is look like a box, and that fixed box, and you have to. That's very common when a society has a lot of anxiety about their own destiny, etc. And that was very common in Latin America when the republics were founded. Everybody were trying to define what an Argentinian is, what Bolivia is, etc., because they were not sure about that. They were new republics. And that's basically is also a romantic idea, the idea of the individual versus the classic idea, right? Less individualistic, but the individual and as a person, but also the individual as a nation.
I would like you to sort of expand on that thought, which I find it's fascinating.
Yeah, I wrote that probably 10 years ago. Hugo Chavez, like the Nicaraguan revolution, was very different to Cuban revolution because they were based on religion in many aspects. And well, in the case of the Nicaraguan revolution, the bases were basically religious bases, completely different to Cuban revolution. And in the case of Chavez, it was a religious individual person, right? He normally quoted Jesus, etc. Now, in the U.S., many people identify, for example, capitalism is democracy and is Christianism, which is completely arbitrary. And China today is a communist country, very capitalist country, nothing to do about democracy. And all the dictatorship we had in Latin America, most of them supported and promoted by U.S. governments. Many, I would say, dozens of them were brutal Nazi-like dictatorships, pro-capitalist. That is why they were dictatorship, to protect the capitals, and nothing to do with democracy. So the identification is part of the ideological or the semantic field.
Yeah.
You identify certain ideas and crystallize those ideas, and then you continue fighting other battles. But capitalism, democracy, and Christianism have been crystallized altogether. So again, you may have some people may question this, but I would say you may have a capitalist democracy, but you may have also, and we have many examples of huge, terrible dictatorship that were capitalist as well. The same with socialism. You have democratic and you may have dictatorship that are socialist or communist. And in the case of Christianism, there is not a single America, there is not a single Christianism. Today, you have many denominations. And they are based on the same book, but religions are not based on the book, are based on readings.
The reading of the book.
Exactly, yeah. And you have many readings, and as many as churches, or as many as denomination religions, Christian religions or sects, right? And if you look at the history, that tragedy is even worse. You have people, Christian killing each other because of that. And the early Christians in the first 3 centuries are completely different to the Christian in the last 3 centuries, for example. The early Christians were persecuted immigrants, just to make a comparison in today's time. And they were persecuted. They were going around many different European countries. And they had a kind of communal style of life, sharing everything, etc., etc. And wealth was not a virtue at that moment. And even when the religion, the Christianism was made of the official religion of the empire of Constantine in the 4th century, 325, even so, the Catholicism for a long time in different denominations consider wealth a sin, not a virtue. It was in the Renaissance that when the Christianism changed almost everything. Not Christianism. Christianism changed its own view. For example, in the medieval times, the nature was enchanted. During the Renaissance, the nature was dead. So they were able to conquer and exploit it because there was not a sacred realm anymore.
Right. It was a non-entity, therefore.
Exactly, like it was among Indians, for example.
Yes. Okay.
So they were Christian as well, but you cannot compare one Christian with the other. They had completely different worldviews. During the Renaissance, particularly with the Protestant ethics and the Calvin, etc., ethics, and for many, wealth was no longer a sign of sin, but a sign that you were favored by God. But if you go to Jesus, that's the point. Everybody knows, but nobody cared about certain ideas he had. For example, the very simple idea that when he said it's easier for a camel to go through the eyes of a needle than a rich man get into the kingdom of God, etc. And what is that? Come on, but the Renaissance Christianism said, no, let's just say that where you read white actually means black. That is interpretation. Okay. So, and then you have a completely different Christianism that was pro-capitalist. But if you go back to the gospel, you are going to find something different. For example, the very few moments when Jesus was angry in a temple was why? Because people were making money in the temple. But today it's something quite common to collect money because God is going to give you more. It's very common. So you have thousands of different Christianism, which means that a religion is not based on a book. It's based on your interpretation of that book. And everybody's sure that my interpretation is the only one possible. And the rest are just fools who are going to burn up in hell. And that's why they hate each other, obviously. And forget the most important teaching of Jesus,
which is love one another. Right?
Yeah. And even love your enemy. Who loves the enemies today?
Actually, I wanna explore a quote that from Samuel Huntington. I would like you to talk about this one a little bit, which we can probably actually use it sort of as a wrap-up idea, right? Mm-hmm. This quote says, "The West did not conquer the world through the superiority of its ideas, values, or religion, but through its superiority in applying organized violence. Westerners tend to forget this fact. Non-Westerners never forget it." So, I don't know what.
Losers never forget.
Losers never forget.
And winners try to forget history as much as possible.
Even though, I mean, so I guess that old adage of history is written by the winners, essentially would be more accurate if we say history is erased by the winners.
Obviously, to write your history, you have to erase the history, to rewrite it.
Okay.
And you have the power to do it because you are the winner.
Mm-hmm.
But those who lost keep looking for the truth.
Okay.
But in the case of Huffington, the idea was basically the clash of civilization. That was an article in a book. That's the idea of in the 90s that there was going to be blocks in the world fighting each other. I remember at that moment I wrote some articles and just saying that there is not now, and there is not going to be a clash of civilization, but a clash of interest. And right now we are having a fight or battle of tribes, not big blocks, but tribes. Different nations trying to build walls around to separate from the rest of the world, etc. They are more the tribalistic mentality, sometimes based on race, sometimes based on geography, wherever. But just think about the outcome of all that history. If we have the American population in this audience, all the American population we put in this audience, half of it half of that this audience owns less than 1% of the total wealth of this country. So the wealth is increasingly being concentrated in fewer and fewer and fewer hands. That is very dangerous because up to a point it's going to be a break. But they normally say, well, we need to pass a tax cut in order to benefit the big guys because they create jobs. Of course, workers never create jobs, right? Just those who don't work. The consumers, doesn't matter. They don't play in this game. But this theory that was very popular in the 80s, that is the trickle-down theory, that is benefit the very rich and the wealth will drop down to the poor. That never happened. But also consider that our world was not built by them. If you name me one billionaire, and there are some that I would say Bill Gates. I have sympathy with Bill Gates. He's a good guy, make donation, etc. But the billionaires never invented one single thing that benefited the whole humanity. They just cash in what the humanity has been creating, inventing, and all that knowledge that has been accumulated in technology. Internet was not invented by Bill Gates, not by Steve Jobs. They just cash in because internet, computer was never invented by them. And what about all the effort that professors, researchers, and the people who pay for those professors through taxes never got that effort back? So there is behind that narrative of the clash of civilization, there are very few people that are profiting from all those distractions that are masked, and people are completely distracted. And the racial anti-immigrant fights are completely childish distractions, completely. And immigrants are not responsible for all the problems we have in this country. We have a lot of criminality. They are the least group,
the least likely group to be involved
in crimes. But the narrative says exactly the opposite. More distraction. Try to find a scapegoat and try to kill the weak, because it's very easy to demonize the weak. And so, going back to Huntington, I still think that it was just a distraction.
I just wanted to know what your thoughts were about yellow journalism that arose near the Spanish and American War, the Cuba-American War at that time, around like 1898, I believe. I just wanted to know what your thoughts on.
That was the very well known and then put in practice many times strategy of the false flag. And the false flag was the main. The attack of that ship near Cuba to implicate Spain in that war. That's not completely clear yet, but there are different explanations to that event. The American politicians said that ship was attacked by Spanish
Navy,
but Spain at that moment was very weak, and was the least country wanted to challenge the U.S. in front, very very close to Florida. So first point. The second point is that there was a commission, American commission, that tried to investigate that, if that was a false flag action or was actually the Spaniard who sunk that ship. And the commission apparently the conclusion was that the Spanish were not responsible. Apparently, some people say that was not very clear, but that was an American commission, and they never conclude that it was actually the Spanish who did that.
But that was post facto, once everything had already happened.
When truth is not important or dangerous anymore. That's normal. And the idea of false flag has been used, or yeah, the idea in many other cases, and sometimes called conspiratory theory. Sometimes it's proved that it was actually real. Sometimes it's very difficult to clarify that.
Do you think that sensationalism journalism is a huge problem today?
It has existed for a long time. I would say that sensational is a problem, but it is even worse lines journalism or complacent journalism.
You talk about these major issues such as income disparity or inequality or reactionary attitudes to immigration. As a writer, do you feel like you can play a role in combating these issues?
Well, I would say that everyone has a role in the society, and doing whatever your profession is, you have a way to contribute positively based on your morals, based on your values, but also based on a certain commitment to truth, because normally that is something uncomfortable to do. You know, you say, I think it was Martin Luther King who said, I'm not sure about that, but to make enemy, just say what you think. And that's very, very uncomfortable and sometimes dangerous. But anyway, we have a moral obligation. If you are an artist, if you are a musician, of course, art is not politics, but sometimes it's crossed by social political issues. Everything is crossed by social political, even religion. You know, Jesus' crucifixion was a highly political execution. It was religion as well from a religious point of view, but it clearly was political. So politics is the business of power. Therefore, we cannot avoid being crossed by that in whatever we do. Politics everywhere. For a writer, of course, and also perhaps even more because we have certain visibility compared to a worker, someone who works in construction, for example. So we do have even more responsibility, I think.
Check. Ooh. So 2 parts. The first part is I'm wondering if popular culture can be subversive, because popular culture is kind of inherently a commodity. It is economically based. So is there a possibility of that, of it being subversive? And the second part of the question is, are economic analyses of society sufficient? It seems like some economists think that everything boils down to economics, but there has to be something more, just something that maybe you repeat yourself and answer.
About the first part, pop culture or popular culture can be both subversive or complacent and work as an anesthesia for the people, and particularly those that popular culture that is produced by the market. For example, if you produce a movie or a novel that is very popular, easy to sell, easy to read, probably it's going to work very functionally to the status quo. It's going to work as an anesthesia. And but on the other hand, there are many cases of popular culture like songs, etc., that were very frontal to certain injustice or certain political situation, and in that case, as I said, may work in both ways. Obviously, I prefer the second one, the subversive, in the sense not of the destructive, but to challenge power. Power always needs to be challenged. Always. The power doesn't need flatterers. Well, they like, but they don't need it. So power needs to be challenged. And the second part, I do agree that the analysis that reduces everything to the economy is too reductionist. We as a human being have other dimensions. For example, when we talk about art, and that's crossed by politics as well, because we live in a society, in poly, from Greek, that's city society. But also, I think that there are certain things that we also explore in literature, in art, that are kind of universal. For example, if you read Shakespeare, if you read the Greeks, if you read some Latin American novelist or an US American writer, whoever, you can explore your own interiority regardless of the moment it was written, regardless of the place it was written, etc. So that shows that there are certain universal values, like in morality, you have a certain universal base: don't kill, don't steal, etc. And then have different ethics, right? And the same in other aspects. For example, in art, of course, we have other human dimension that has, if not nothing to do, at least they're independent to the economy, the politics itself. Fortunately, we are very complex human beings, and art has that particularity to explore and expand our interior world.
I wanted to give the students a chance to speak up, because I'd much rather hear from you all. But I have a question to bring us back to something more present tense. I think we've all seen that in different areas of the mainstream media, the figure of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is being mocked and scorned in a lot of ways. And I wonder if you think that is mostly due to her youth, to her being a woman, to her being more on the left end of the spectrum, at least relative to what the spectrum is in the United States, to her not being from a wealthy family. I just wondered what you would attribute that really open scorn that so many people have for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
I would say that is because of everything you mentioned, you listed. Yeah,
so it would be a perfect the poster child of intersectional theory, right?
And consider that historically also the American president had to be poor and be then success and get the government. That was kind of a very old-fashioned tradition that was broken recently. But of course, the gender, ethnicity, age, ideology plays a very important role. But also, I think there is another important point there. Nobody mocks and invests a lot of energy trying to disqualify someone that has no chance to challenge you. And she has that potentiality, I think.
I really appreciate your coming here. Thank you very much. I don't know about y'all, but I had a blast. Call me nerd. It's all right. And anyway, well, yeah, please go ahead. Clap. Yeah, fine. Thank you.